Hi students, this is the last chapter for our consumer behavior class, and this chapter is all about culture and rituals and how they relate to our behavior as consumers. And in your case, you'll be relating this back to your project, your seafood project, and how you can use these concepts to help complete your project. So let's get started. A culture is a society's personality. We know that when we can go to different cultures, we see that different personalities come out depending on where you are. Many of you are well traveled and from different places, and I think you can agree. So let's get down to some of the concepts of the chapter. So first of all, what is a culture? It is an accumulation of shared meanings, rituals, norms, and traditions. So that's a lot going on. So when we think about America, what shared meanings, rituals, norms, and traditions do we have? But then we kind of blend that in with other cultures because, like we talked about in the last chapter, many of our aunts and uncles or parents come from different places. And so it does truly become a melting pot here in America. Culture is society's personality. And when we use the word culture shock, it's when we are immersed in a different culture and feel the effects of that are much different than our own. So maybe you got culture shock when you started at FAU because you were used to being in high school, and the shock of being in more of an environment that had more accountability and where you are an adult with responsibilities. That might be an example of a culture shock. A culture shock for me might be that I came from the Northeast in Pennsylvania and now here I am in Florida. The culture shock might be the amazing weather. It could be the laid back culture here that's a little more kind of come as you are versus up in the Northeast. So that's what I mean by culture shock. And some of you, admittedly so, said that some of your parents or relatives experienced a culture shock when coming to the U.S. So understanding culture. So products can reflect underlying cultural priorities of a particular period of time. So I'm going to talk about some different products here, and we're going to kind of relate that back to our culture. So what do the following products say about our society? So the first one is a TV dinner for the United States. So the TV dinner came out in the 1950s by Swanson, who was owned by Campbell Soup. And that product basically is, what does that reflect about our culture? Well, we're eating at home more in front of the television. That was why they were called TV dinners, because no one wanted to miss a quote unquote program. And programs only came on at certain times. There were no reruns. And when they came on, they were on and then they were off. You couldn't get them back again. Unlike today where we have Netflix and we can binge watch. So that's an example of what a product says about the US in the 1950s. Cosmetics made of natural materials without animal testing. So this is more of a trend, a recent trend for the last 20 years probably or more, where cosmetics companies are caring because we as consumers are caring. We actually care what happens with the cosmetics that we use. It's not just about looking good. It's about, who are they harming? And then lastly is a pastel carrying case for condoms. So this is a little bit of a departure, but basically this is showing us that, women have rights. We're more proactive about protecting ourselves and about our bodies and have that freedom to do so. So if you jumbled this all up, certainly number 3 would not go over well at the number one in the 1950s by any stretch of the imagination. So our society has evolved, and these types of products have evolved, and they reflect our priorities as a society. Certainly, there's a lot more products than what I have listed here, but at least that'll kind of get you thinking about it. A cultural system consists of uh, three functions. Okay, so what do I mean by a cultural system? So there's ecology, a social structure, and ideology. So culture continuously evolves, as you can see from our last examples. So ecology is the way the system adapts to its habitat. The technology a culture uses to obtain and distribute its resources shapes ecology. So certainly many things have changed for our world and for our environment. Think in terms of power sources and solar panels and that type of technology that has changed. The next is social structure, the way people maintain an orderly social life, including politics. So the example there is the rules and regulations in our society that keeps us from, going crazy. It could be things like traffic signals. Um, it can be things like etiquette, the the way we remain a society that doesn't end up killing one another. The right thing to do is our social structure. Ideology is mental characteristics of a people, common worldviews, shared principles of fairness and order. That also goes hand in hand with social structure. So, again, that leads into different rituals that we'll talk about later. Okay, culture production system. A culture production system is a set of individuals and organizations that create a market and market a cultural product. So you've heard of the word pop culture, which just means popular culture. And it's anything popular that's happening in our society. It could be something popular like a fad or a celebrity, or which could be negative or positive, something in the news, okay, is called popular culture. So there's a subsystem that creates pop culture. It just doesn't pop up out of nowhere, no pun intended. So first there's a creative part, and that's a part that generates new symbols and products. Okay, managerial is the managerial manages the distribution of these new symbols, and communication gives meaning to the new product. So here's the example because that sounds a little jumbled. Let's start first of an example. So if in pop culture, we know Beyonce, okay? So the first example is that she releases a new album. So number one, she is the a singer. Two, her management is Columbia Records. Number three, you have an ad agency. And that's the communication part of it. And corporations like Pepsi who work with her to arrange appearances for events such as the Super Bowl. Okay, so that's how something in pop culture goes through what we call a culture production system. It's kind of dissecting pop culture. So where does culture come from? So it comes from a lot of different places, but sometimes something works itself out small and then slowly gets into the mainstream. So the influence of inner city teens, hip hop and black urban culture, outsider heroes, anti-oppression messages, and alienation of blacks, and flavor on the streets. So that is where culture comes from. Okay, a lot of variety of places, and as it kind of gets honed in and more popularized, it becomes something that's mainstream. High and low culture. High culture is a, an art product. It's an object we admire for its beauty and our emotional response. It could also be a craft product that is admired because of the beauty of which it forms a function. Okay, and lastly, mass culture creates products for a mass market. So you think of something that's like an art product is something that's very much limited, sought after, maybe one of a kind. Craft product means that it's, made in batches. Okay, think of like craft beers. Okay, and then something that's for the masses would be like a Bud Light. Okay, so this is high culture and low culture. High is the art part, and low becomes more available to everyone. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about are myths and stories that express a culture's values. And in modern times, marketing messages convey these values to members of the culture. So we kind of talked about this before when we talked about certain symbols, mythological symbols that advertisers use. Typically someone that's like the David and Goliath kind of a scenario where there's a hero or there's a queen or there's a witch. So although we don't have witches and things in commercials, we all get the idea of what that symbol means in myths and stories growing up, thanks to Disney. Okay, so myths are stories with symbolic elements that represent a shared emotion or ideals of a culture. So for instance, we all know the story about, say, Pinocchio, and that if you lie, your nose grows and bad things happen to you. Or we know about Little Red Riding Hood. Different stories of fables and stories we were told as children. Story characteristics typically have things in them like a conflict between opposing forces. An outcome is a moral guide for people. Myth reduces anxiety by providing guidelines. So we already know the story, and we know that, good always overcomes evil. We associate a lot with ancient Greeks and Romans, and consumer fairy tales marketed by Disney hold about, so consumer fairy tales, okay. So Disney, for instance, definitely has the corner on the market for, stories and fables, with many of their stories, including Cinderella. I spelled Cinderella here wrong, I apologize. So much so that Disney holds 2,000 plus weddings each year that are based off of Cinderella, with the big stagecoach that it looks like a pumpkin, and the dress and the slippers and the whole thing, and Prince Charming, and to over 2,000 weddings a year. Wow. So we really do like our stories. We like the predictability of it. It gives us a comfort. And in marketing, they use that quite a bit in the way that we promote products. Okay, functions of myths. So the metaphysical function is it helps to explain the origins of existence. Cosmologically emphasizes that all components of the universe are part of a single picture. Sociological maintains a social order by authorizing a social code to be followed by members of a culture. Okay, sociological maintains social order by authorizing a social code to be followed by members of a culture. And psychological provides models for personal conduct. So this is all the functions of myths. You didn't even know it. Broke it down, and this is how these can be applied to marketing and consumer behavior. Myths abound in modern popular culture. So myths are often found in comic books, movies, holidays, and commercials. Monomyths, a myth that is common to many cultures. For instance, many of us know in many different cultures what Spider-Man and Superman stand for, and many movies and commercials present characters and plot structures that follow mythic patterns. Many of our consumption activities, including holidays, observances, grooming, and gift giving, relate to rituals. I don't think that sometimes we're aware of how many ritualistic things that we do, but once this chapter is complete, you will understand that certain things and behaviors that we do over and over again are just kind of habit sometimes. Sometimes they have to do with our culture, and we'll go into more details here. So rituals are sets of multiple symbolic behaviors that occur in a fixed sequence and that tend to be repeated periodically. Many consumer activities are ritualistic, such as our trip to Starbucks or Dunkin' or Wawa, Sunday brunch for those who have time, beauty rituals, things that we do over and over again, and then exercise rituals. Some of those have been disrupted right now because of lack of gyms being open, so now we've had to make up new rituals. So for instance, my new ritual is that I will either bike or walk every day. Something to just kind of get my stress out and something I'm used to doing. And all of you have different rituals that you do every day. And now I'm just kind of calling them out. So rituals. Ritual artifacts are parts of the ritual. For instance, rice at a wedding, birthday candles, diplomas for graduation, which hopefully all of you will be getting. And hopefully the ceremony will be postponed and ready to go maybe for August for those May grads. Ritual scripts are a sequence in which we use these artifacts. Okay, so think about a wedding and how all the parts that go to a wedding. And I'm going to open up page 526 because it's so worth going through, and something I didn't even realize until dissected the parts of a wedding. Okay, if you look on page 526, which I'm doing right now, I'm going to share with you some of the rituals of a wedding ceremony. Once you hear some of them, you might make decisions differently when getting married. I can confess that some of these rituals I performed, and looking back, did not realize what they actually meant in the real world. Okay, so let's go here. So giving away the bride, for example. Years ago, it was common for fathers to use daughters as currency to pay off debt or to appease a member of a powerful tribe. The bride wore a veil so that the payee would not refuse her as a payment in case she turned out to be less attractive. Yes, I did wear a veil. Okay. The best man. Usually we think this is a special person in our life. So the textbook talks about his original job was to stand next to the couple to be sure the bride wasn't kidnapped during the ceremony. He was chosen because he was best with his sword. Similarly, bridesmaids were instructed to dress similarly to the bride to confuse potential kidnappers and evil spirits. Somehow this custom evolved to the design of hideous gowns that make a bride look better in comparison. Tossing of the garter. At one time, the bride and groom were expected to conclude the marriage ceremony and retire immediately to a nearby room to, quote, close the deal, end quote. To make the consummation official, witnesses would crowd around the nuptial bed and hoped to grab a lucky piece of the bride's gown as it was ripped from her body. Over time, modesty prevailed, and the guests had to settle for a symbolic piece of the undergarment. And lastly, throwing rice, which we did not do at my wedding. Rice is a symbol of fertility. This action is supposed to encourage the newlyweds to get busy and start producing offspring. More recently, many couples have replaced rice with butterflies and bubbles and other things because of the false rumor that birds who eat the rice will die when it expands in their stomachs. So, I think if my daughters want to change up the idea, if they decide to get married, we do not need to go with all of that pomp and circumstance with a traditional wedding. So I thought you'd think that was pretty funny. So let's move on to another ritual, which is called a fortress brand. And this is where you take an actual brand that is used to perform rituals. The example I have here is Gatorade that's poured over the coach's head or the manager's head if they win a championship game. A fortress brand could be a brand of champagne, for instance, when celebrating something. So think of a fortress brand other than Gatorade, and see how that plays a part in your ritual. Okay, common rituals. Grooming, so obviously combing your hair, brushing your teeth. Gift giving for holidays and birthdays. And, obviously common rituals for so many different holidays. Some of you mentioned holidays in your family, St. Patrick's Day, Christmas. I think Christmas up and until April, one of my students said, leaving the Christmas tree up and decorating it for all different holidays. That's a new holiday that I didn't know about. And rites of passage, which could be Hell Week for fraternities. A rite of passage is crossing the stage of graduation. So these are common rituals. Holiday rituals. Okay, on to holiday rituals. For Christmas, for instance, many of you shared your rituals, whether it be putting up a Christmas tree or holiday caroling, in this case, making cookies. Everybody has their different traditions. I know in the Italian tradition, they have the 7 fishes, which would be a great thing to consider here for the seafood project that you're doing. Halloween, pumpkin carving, apple picking, costumes. Valentine's Day, sending something sweet to a Valentine or a Galentine, whatever you prefer. So these are just different rituals that we have in our particular culture. So explain some of your own family traditions. How do they affect your behavior as a consumer? Now, if we were in class, certainly I'd be asking you this question to get some feedback, but a lot of you did share your holiday traditions, whether it be a certain soup that you make or a different delicacy that you have at holiday time, how you all come together and open up gifts, and some of you have shared some fun stories. So rites of passage, rituals we perform to mark a change in our social status. You may or not realize you did this, but let's kind of call out some of these rites of passage. So for instance, separation, that would be that time when we're leaving home for the first time, in some cases, to go to college, to FAU. Liminality is learning the campus. And then aggregation is returning to society with a new status. So in the case of that college student, they left for college, they got to know the campus, started meeting friends, and then they come back for Thanksgiving break, come back home, and they're now a vet. Or you might be feeling that right now if a lot of you are home from college like my children are, and it's like, okay, now you've kind of gone through your first year of college or more, and that's a rite of passage for that social status of, moving through the next 3 years in the case of my daughter. And then finally graduation, which is also a rite of passage to go from, learning in the classroom to now putting on maybe a suit and going to an office and becoming an 9 to 5 working for a company. Okay, gift giving stages. Whether you know this or not, there are stages in gift giving. First one is called gestation, and the giver procures an item or a gift for somebody. The presentation of that gift comes when you actually have a gift exchange, whether it's a mutual or not, depending on the situation. And lastly, reformulation. The giver and receiver redefine their bond. Negativity can arise if the recipient feels the gift was inappropriate or inferior. This may have happened to you. Sacred and profane consumption. So sacred consumption involves objects and events that are set apart from normal activities that are treated with some respect. For instance, the example here we're going to use is a wedding dress versus maybe an everyday dress, or a tuxedo versus a regular suit or collared shirt and jacket. Profane consumption involves consumer objects and events that are ordinary and everyday, like a work dress. So something's either sacred or profane. Sacralization occurs when ordinary objects, events, and even people take on a sacred meaning. The example here I have is Elvis Presley. He, since his death many years ago now, he has turned into this kind of mythical person that did amazing things, and obviously they still call him the king. And there's so many people that have turned his popularity into this, major sacred meaning. Objectification occurs when we attribute sacred qualities to mundane items through processes like contamination, it's called. And I have an example here of the ruby slippers. And then finally, under sacralization, are collecting. So this is the acquisition of a particular object or objects. Because we have an emotional connection with them, they become very sacred to us. So I have Beanie Babies here. Maybe you're guilty of that. Maybe you're guilty of another type of product that you collect. But it becomes something that's very sacred. The domains of sacred consumption. So there's sacred places, such as religious or mystical places, your country of heritage. It could be a place like Stonehenge or Mecca or even Ground Zero in New York City. But they become sacred places to us. Sacred people could be royalty or celebrities. And then sacred events could be athletic events like the Super Bowl, or even religious ceremonies, such as marriage, baptism, something like that. There's also sacred souvenir icons that we collect. So local products could be something that is like something regional, like wine. Pictorial images could be things like photos or postcards. The piece of the rock is something like seashells, something we bring back from a vacation. Literal representations, so like mini icons. I have the picture here of the Statue of Liberty. You may have something like the Liberty Bell, or even some other, piece of an icon that you collected when on a trip. I remember I collected, when I went to Paris, I needed to get Eiffel Tower earrings. Please, I have no idea why I needed those, but that was something on my list of things to do. I thought that would be so cool. This was back in the 80s. Okay, markers are logo-oriented T-shirts. For instance, and I have Boca Raton, Florida here, just to make it very regional, and so you can connect to it. So there are souvenirs. I'm sure you each have something that either you have from a place that you went or someone gave it to you. Desacralization is when a sacred symbol is removed from its special place and is duplicated in mass quantities. It's now lost its specialness and it becomes profane. Now, I have two examples up here. One is the crosses here. If I showed a picture of Madonna, I would be showing my age, but I'll do it anyway in my explanation. It was such a big deal in the 80s when Madonna wore all kinds of crosses around her neck, because everyone thought that was like sacrilegious, that she would use the sign of the cross and Jesus around her, and yet she was, gyrating about the stage, as they said. Now, they've kind of lost their specialness, especially if you're wearing them as more of a fashion piece here in this necklace that Rihanna has on. The other area that's become kind of desacralized is holidays. So, for instance, Christmas is a religious holiday, and Ramadan, and they're celebrated as secular, more like a materialistic occasion now, whether you're religious or not. You might be celebrating Christmas, gift giving, kind of that overindulgence time of year. So that's called desacralization. The diffusion of innovations. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting concept. I think you'll find. So innovation is any product that consumers perceive to be new. And so how can we relate this back to the seafood business? So in a way, aquaculture is a new product. It's a new process. It's a new way for us to be sustainable. So innovation also means new manufacturing technique, a new product variation. It could be a new way to deliver a product or a new way to package a product. So that's innovation. The diffusion of innovation is successful innovation spread throughout a population at various rates. And this diffusion of innovation is otherwise known as disruptors. So I used to think of disruption in like, if something's disruptive, it means that it's negative. In marketing, disruptors are positive. They come in and they change around everything. For instance, I have the example of Airbnb. No longer are you just someone who gets to go to a hotel anymore and you're limited when you go somewhere to visit. Where do we stay? Oh, we have to stay in that local hotel. Not anymore. You can be someone who can get a local flavor and rent an Airbnb, and quite nice ones in all different cities all over the country, and do it all on your own with this third-party Airbnb, and avoid hotels altogether. So that's considered diffusion of innovation, successful innovations that is spread through the population at various rates. And I do have a YouTube video I want you to watch so you can see what exactly I mean by this. It gives a little more of an explanation if this isn't making a lot of sense. The next thing I want to talk about is the types of adopters that are out there. So they call this a product life cycle, and it's a bell curve. And in the very beginning, you have people that we call innovators of early adopters. Those people are the ones that get the latest and greatest, whether it's a new iPhone or a new piece of technology, smart TV, whatever it might be. It could be a Tesla. So they're the people that are the risk takers that want to be the first. And then they kind of move their way up the ladder here to what we call the early majority. And that's people that are, they wait for the innovator, early adopter types to kind of try it out. And then they're like, okay, that seems okay. The price is stable. It's not overly expensive anymore. Maybe I'll go try it out. And then on the right side, you have the late majority, and that's still the people that still don't believe, want to wait till the price comes down. That's equal to the early majority. And then you have the laggards. That's probably more the elderly that don't really see this innovation necessary in their life. They like to stick with their old ways of doing things until, of course, they're introduced to the way that, say, technology can change their life. So there's three types of innovation. And again, let's relate this back to aquaculture. There's continuous innovation. It's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Adding a line extension or a new flavor is an example. So a product, just think of a consumer packaged good out there, won't be in business too long if they're not innovating. So they have innovation teams that are constantly trying to make a product better, maybe come out with a new flavor or a complete new line extension. Okay, dynamically continuous innovation, more pronounced change to an existing product. So the big change way back when was a flip top to cans. They used to have tabs. The tab you would pull off, it was sharp, people would throw it on the ground, it wasn't safe, and it was litter. So can companies came out with this great idea of why not do this flip top to the can. It goes in, it's not sharp, we avoid litter, ta-da, it's ready to go. So I think more dynamically continuous innovation is going to happen more now, even in our world of delivery and the way that products are delivered to us since this coronavirus. You've seen companies kind of really jump on it pretty quickly and make changes to the way that they deliver products, whether it's curbside delivery, delivery dudes, Shipt, gosh, a lot of other companies out there that are working to make sure that products are continuously getting to us. But that's like a great example of being dynamically continuous. Although you can also add it into continuous innovation as well, because we had to evolve into this new world that we have. And I don't think we're ever going to go back after this virus has calmed down. The last one is called discontinuous innovation. Creates major changes in the way we live. Companies like airlines, airplanes, cars, and computers, they are huge innovations that have changed our lives. Most of what you're doing with this project can fall into the first two areas of innovation. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. Prerequisites for successful adoption. So again, let's think of this in terms of aquaculture and the seafood industry. One, someone will adopt a new innovation if it's compatible with their lifestyle. Two, trialability. People are more likely to adopt an innovation if they can experiment with it prior to purchase, like if there's a trial size of something or maybe some sort of a coupon. Complexity. A product that is easy to understand will be chosen over competitors. Number 4, observability. Innovations that are easily observable are more likely to spread. I give the example here. The old fanny pack is back and it's over, people can see the ease of use over, say, a wallet or a purse. And then the last group here is relative advantage. The product should offer a relative advantage over other alternatives. So I think you can kind of tap into a few of these in here that will work for calling out concepts and using these concepts to offer suggestions to the seafood industry. For reflection, where does your product or service fit into this innovation model? Okay, many people and organizations play a role in the fashion system that creates and communicates symbolic meanings to consumers. Well, in this last chapter for consumer behavior, it really talks about how fashion in our cultures also show the type of personality of a particular culture as well, whether it be of a particular age group or a particular location in our country. So let's talk a little bit more about fashion. So the fashion system includes all those people and organizations involved in creating symbolic meanings and transferring these meanings to cultural goods. So fashion is the process of social diffusion where some groups adopt a new style. Many of us want to be in fashion, and it motivates us to what we buy. And fashion products reflect a culture's artistic traditions and history. So when we think of things like bell bottoms or crop tops or cuff jeans or ruffled neckline or a thin tie or a thick tie or a blazer or a jacket or a three-piece suit. So whatever's the fashion of the times. And that constantly shifts, and fashion does repeat itself. Behavioral science perspectives and the models of fashion. So psychologically, fashion is something that we might conform to and express our personal style. Economically, if you are able to purchase something that is scarce or rare, it becomes a prestigious type of a product. Sociological, subcultures adoption of fashion and its diffusion. So that could be fashion in grunge or hip hop. And medical or meme theory is a phrase or a picture that goes viral. And I like this picture over here on the right. Isn't it nice to live in a time when women aren't being pushed around so much anymore? So whether it be the wide hips or the push-up corsets in whatever it is that we're wearing, kind of interesting. And this is all for a bra company called Maiden Form. Fashion does follow cycles and reflect cultural dynamics. So we start here in the 1900s up to 1980. I don't know what happened to the rest of 2020 here, but you can see that the length of the skirt is getting shorter. It's different fashion for women, including their hair and hats and capes, and the length of the skirt coming up from 1940 on, which I find interesting. So the cycles of fashion adoption, there's an acceptance cycle. The way we identify different classes of fashion, we regard to their length of acceptance. So there's classic fashion, always is around for a long time. Companies like Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, yes, they do have some fashionable pieces, but basically they sell a lot of classic pieces that, will be around for a long time. Fads have no meaningful function. They spread impulsively, diffuse rapidly, gain quick acceptance, and then die out quickly. Certainly we can all relate to something that we've worn and then we look back and say, oh my God, I can't believe I wore my hair like that or wore that necklace or shirt or whatever it was. I just happen to have a pair of sunglasses here. Not sure why they were popular and when, but they've soon left us, and for good reason. Okay, this is what the graph looks like. So with the fad, it's very short-lived, you see, and with fashion, it's that bell curve again. Things go up, things go down. With classic, there's a whole like slow hill that you climb, and it stays like popular, like a nice pair of black pants. Classic, get away with it with anything. You can make it more fashionable or not, and you can get away with wearing a black suit, for instance, for pretty much anything, or dark blue. It's a classic suit, but you could put a flair of fashion in there, maybe like a scarf or something with a pattern, snake pattern or leopard print, for instance. And then fads would be something like, a wide leg pant or a cropped top, which I see a lot of today, but they were very popular back in the mid 80s. So global consumer culture, what drives consumers in other cultures? So a global consumer culture unites consumers around the world of their common devotion to a brand name. Consumers, consumer goods, movie stars, celebrities, leisure activities. There's definitely a global brand such as McDonald's here. Nike's a great example, Adidas. Um, these are brands that no matter where you go, they're recognized. Celebrities, the same thing, that are particularly popular, or leisure activities. Products that succeed in one culture, as we know, may fail in another if marketers fail to understand the differences among consumers in each place. So, as we talked about last class, many blunders have been made through marketing history, but now niche agencies are handling these cultural differences, whether you're African American or whether you're a woman, you speak Spanish. So we don't want to make these blunders again. So many agencies have hired out specialty agencies or niche agencies that can help them get through these possible blunders. So here's a great example of a Western brand called Nativa. The West is a net exporter of popular things in the world, and the word creolization occurs when foreign influences integrate with local meanings. So rather than ignore global characteristics of brands, companies manage them strategically. So for example, this Nativa is a Coke product in Argentina, and it's flavored with the country's traditional yerba mate herbal tea, something that wouldn't fly here, but definitely flies in Argentina and gives Coke kind of that regional advantage to connecting with that region on a flavor that they enjoy. So as we said here, instead of ignoring it, rather integrate it, and it's called creolization. Adopt a standardized strategy. Okay, so we do know that Disney is all over the world now, and they didn't always have luck with this. Euro Disney was a fail at first, and they used Disney as an example of a company that has a lot of standardized strategies, but realizes that when entering into different marketplaces, how they have to change it up. So an edict perspective is this: commonalities across cultures. For example, we all know the teenage girls have concerns and questions about puberty and insecurity. An emic perspective, that's EMIC, stresses variations across cultures. Each country has a national character, a distinctive set of behaviors and personality characteristics. So Euro Disney was reborn and reopened and made sure that they were able to understand the culture and celebrate it rather than making it just the Americanized version of Disney in Europe. Okay, so this is an interesting concept. It's called Hofstede Dimensions of National Culture. So if you're getting ready to do work with a different country, I know some of you have internships or jobs where you're working with different countries and trying to understand their culture, this is a great video to watch that explains this concept a little bit. But I'll go into some explanation of it as it is our last slide. So this Hofstede Dimensions of National Culture says that there's 6 dimensions that are widely used to measure cross-cultural values. I'm sure there's more, but this is his study. So one is power distance, meaning unequal power distribution, like for instance, in families or in certain cultures that have kings and queens in their political system. Individualism, the degree to which individuals are integrated into groups versus working alone, and how that works in a business setting in a different culture. The next is called masculinity and its distribution of roles in society. How do they feel about different roles, especially of women in certain societies? We do know that some women in different cultures aren't even allowed in a room. They have to cover themselves up. They're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to vote. So understanding that when we're working with another culture is very important in business, and kind of like know where you stand. Uncertainty, avoidance, tolerance for uncertainty or ambiguity. Each culture deals differently with decision making when things aren't exactly clear which path to take. Long-term orientation is thrift and perseverance. In some cultures, it takes a long time to build relationships, to trust, and to do a business deal. Whereas in America, the short-term orientation is kind of like all about you, or all about us. You know, we're like, okay, let's make the deal, let's go, let's get moving. Whereas in other cultures, that's not how it works, and it's insulting to them. And then the last one here is indulgence versus restraint. Does a society allow free gratification, having fun, and enjoying life? So obviously in America, we're kind of a very free culture, whereas other cultures are a little more restricted and a little more disciplined. So it's important to note that when dealing with someone at a business level or otherwise, to know that their culture is different from ours. So please take a look at this YouTube video. I think it explains it a little bit more for you, and I want you to really have an understanding of this for a lot of reasons. This is our last chapter. So please apply the concepts from chapter 14 to your paper. There was a few that I pointed out along the way for your seafood project. This is also helpful for your upcoming quiz. And again, if you have not already scheduled a date with me for a call, please do so. I'm having a deadline of next week. Let me get the date for you so that you'll all understand if you haven't signed up already. So next week is the 8th. So by April 8th, if you have not already scheduled with me for a conference call, your group will not get the 5 points for the rubric. So please keep that in mind. If you've already talked with me, which I've talked to many of you, thank you. I think I cleared up a lot for you. I hope so. But April 8th will be the date. I will also send out a reminder on announcements. Thank you.